Welcome to the Cynical Developer Live. This is the podcast that helps you improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology, providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. In this 4-part mini-series, we're recording in person at Percona Live Europe 2019 in Amsterdam. In this episode, we talked to Anthony Cosgrove about AI for good. Anthony has been a programmer for over 15 years, and for the last 4.5 years, he's been leading development on 2 European projects: the Common European Submission Portal, which allows the pharmaceutical industry and EU regulatory agencies to securely exchange scientific information about medical products, and most recently on a web-based marketing authorization system for medical products in the EU. Outside of web development, Anthony is keenly interested in the uses of artificial intelligence, or AI, in the areas of healthcare and assistive technologies like social robotics. So welcome to the Cynical Developer.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So we are here to talk about AI, which, as you well know, is a massive exploding area of tech at the moment, and we could talk for hours and hours on the topic. So Anthony is actually a long-time listener, first-time caller,
Yeah, exactly.
and he reached out to me on Twitter back in May of this year, which is 2009, for anybody that's traveling through history through podcasting. And he reached out to me because he'd listened to and enjoyed the 3-part series that we did on AI and ML with Eddie Au, and they were episodes 101, 102, and 103. So if you haven't listened to those, once you've listened to this episode, definitely go back and check that out. We talk about everything there, from a bit of robotics to Terminator and all the other interesting things that go on with this massive topic that tends to scare a lot of people. Now, your day job, Anthony, really doesn't sound like it has much to do with AI. I've worked in a similar industry to yourself. I worked with pharmaceutical drug licensing software for passing around the documents for licensing, but nothing is quite as intense as what you're doing. But can you sort of tell us the story behind how you got interested in AI?
Yeah, sure. So in 2006, I started doing a master's in evolutionary and adaptive systems at the University of Sussex, and I happened to read a paper on joint attention and developmental robotics, and I'd never heard of either of those things before, and so I found them really fascinating because developmental robotics is trying to model processes in human development in an effort to try and find ways that we could build adaptable robots that could eventually sort of learn by themselves. And what joint attention is it's a process in the development of infants where they learn to follow what someone is looking at. And so it's a kind of a shared attention that they know what you're looking at and you know they're looking at it too. And it's a kind of stepping stone in the development of kind of, I suppose, communication and sort of dialogue, and they learn about to think of other people that someone else is learning to look at other things. And so in the same paper, they were referencing work that was being done at a place like MIT by Cynthia Brazil and Brian Scazzolati, and they were talking about using it in sort of as a way to build social robots. And that's basically how I got into it. I was just absolutely fascinated that it was even a field.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I guess slightly scary at the same time, that because we know about AI and machine learning, and from a machine learning point of view, is that you would train the model for the machine learning on a specific thing. Now, if this code base is going out and learning from itself, that's it's interesting. It is interesting, but it begs the question: what was the necessity for it? What were they hoping to gain from that?
So the thinking behind the developing social robots was that by having robots that were going to work with people, collaborate in their jobs, and sort of cooperate and work in human teams, that by having robots that could operate socially and understand people socially, that there would be a more there'd be a more intuitive interface, and so that people would interact with them easier, be able to understand them, and uh, that's sort of where they were, what the aim of the field was, or and continues to be the aim of the field.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I've seen some videos recently of the robots that companies are building that have been built with AI and machine learning involved, and they've got quite a few of them out there that they now have natural language,
Mm-hmm.
or as close as we can get to natural language, and they can hold a conversation and things like that. And that's really really impressive that they can do that. And I guess that's a part of that field, is it?
Yeah, the whole point really is to use kind of the standard human communication modalities. So speech is one, gestures, body language, facial expressions. They're sort of designed to leverage the kind of innate psychological traits that we have, or if you're familiar with the term anthropomorphism, where
Yeah,
people
yeah,
will sort of apply goals and intentions to any sort of movement that seems autonomous. And there's an experiment done in the 1940s by Hyder and Semmel, I think their names are, and it's just an animation with a few geometric shapes. There's two triangles, one large one small one, a circle, and kind of a larger rectangle. And it's a series of animations. And when they asked people what they saw, people then applied kind of, they created characters, and they said, oh, there's kind of emotion, and applied intention to the movement of the shapes they saw, even though there's actually no standard human communication. You know, there's no speech, there's no sound or gesture or anything like that.
right. Yeah, yeah. The all that sort of stuff's pretty good. I like that area of delving into the human psyche and watching them apply things where they're not there, where they look for patterns that they don't exist. Um, but yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah,
cool.
that's what actually kind of really drew me into it. Was it's kind of, it melds so many fields. There's engineering, mechanical and software. There's psychology, sociology, developmental biology, and things like that are all kind of all working together to try and create something that you would treat, or not necessarily treat it as human, but you would interact with it socially. That the design of them, their facial expressions, or the kind of socially evocative, I suppose is the word, that they kind of encourage you to interact with them socially, even though you might know it's a machine, you still kind of interact with it, or you might be surprised by it, or just to talk to it or use terms that would describe human behavior.
Yeah, yeah. I think on the lower levels, you've got bots and things that you talk to online, where now you're never sure if you're actually talking to a person or not. And I've heard that Google have bots now that will ring up local businesses and get information for the local business opening times, maybe if it's a restaurant, menus and stuff like that. But the person that they're talking to doesn't realize that they're talking to AI, which is it's quite
Yeah, that's a
freaky.
little bit worrying. All right.
Um, yeah, and you talk there about facial expressions. Now, I think there's three or four robots that were on these videos that I was watching, and they all resemble in some way the robot from, is it Ex Machina? I think the film. They look somewhat like her, where they had a glass dome at the back of their head. Um, they tried to do smiling and they tried to give facial expressions, but there's definitely a lot of work that's needed there. It was a little bit freaky, and you could see the people that were talking to them slightly unsettled by
Yeah,
them because the emotions weren't quite right.
yeah, there's that, like the term is the uncanny valley, where the closer something gets to being, or to looking like human, we sort of kind of feel less like it's human, and then the further away it gets, is it's sort of like, okay, you sort of accept the mistakes and you go, that's, it's close enough.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's all that side of it that we've talked about there. Um, But there's the slightly more fun side of it for us, and I think that's the robotic side of it. And we're getting to the point now where we can actually have these AI robots in our home. So, do you have much experience with any of these robots yourself?
But yeah, well, from listening to your podcasts, the 101, 102, and 103, that you mentioned the Anki Vector, or Anki Vector, however it's pronounced. So I've always, like I said, fascinated by social robotics, and previously they've just been like prohibitively expensive. This
Yeah.
one was pretty cheap, and when I looked at it on YouTube, I saw that it had an SDK and everything. I was like, I knew exactly kind of what I wanted to do with it, and from that, I got my letter off to Santa Claus in time, and managed to get one just after Christmas, and with
Yep.
the intention of building kind of my own kind of medication adherence project. So I have Crohn's disease, which is an inflammatory bowel disease, and I had to drop out of the masters I was doing it because of it. So I got a postgraduate diploma eventually, but I was never able to kind of fully go on and do all the interesting stuff that I wanted to do. So
Sure.
getting Vector was a way to kind of get a bit of that, and get back a bit of that, and to be able to kind of get all these ideas I had out of my head into practice and see if they actually worked. So I built a project based that would initially just remind me to take when to take my medication in the morning, what I was supposed to take, and how much of it I had left. And once I got familiar with that, then I started to trick about with the animation system and the actuators and controls, and started to add in kind of the first reminder of the day would be sort of a general one. The second one would be an angry one, or there'd be a sad one. And then I put in a celebration that was a kind of a dance, that if I had taken the medication without being reminded, it would do a little dance. And you could hear it in the apartment. And it was just great because I had to switch I had to switch my medication. So I was going through a kind of what's called just suffering from kind of depressive moods, and it was kind of the perfect thing at the right time, at the perfect time, because dealing with a chronic illness is it's quite a grind on a sort of a daily basis. And so working with the robot was kind of a little bit of therapy at the same time, but also it kind of really lightened the mood to be able to hear this little robot like up in the office down you could hear him from down in the bedroom giving out to me for not taking my medication, or swearing at me, or kind of I programmed in some of the text to speech in it to use sort of Irish phrases, like Majin Wa, which is good morning, or kind of a sarcastic joke I have with my friends who say "Bula bus." Now, it means like round of applause in Irish, but we use it kind of sarcastically.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, oh, round of applause for you. You took your medicine. So that kind of humor really helped, and yeah, it was brilliant, and that's why I wanted to get in touch with you on Twitter, just to say thanks a million, because anytime I've read an article or listened to music or play a game or anything, and it's helped me or I've really enjoyed it, I always try to make contact with the people who did it, just to let them know, like, hey, thanks a million, because you see so much nonsense and noise on social media, people just so critical, that I just thought it's just to let people know that, hey, it's been a real help.
Yeah, I'm glad that you did reach out, because it's always nice to find that somebody found something interesting, or it helped them with their job, but it helped you in ways that I could never have even imagined. So that was fantastic. And after our conversation on Twitter, I finally decided I'm going to get a Vector, and one came up on Amazon Prime Day, and I got one then, and it is peculiar, I guess is the word, that anthropomorphism side of Vector, because I've had it sat on the desk, and for those of you that don't know much about Vector, is that it can do a lot of different things. You can play card games with it, you can interact with it, you can stroke it. When you walk into the room, it can remember the faces, I think, of up to 10 people, something like that. And when I would walk into the office, it would call me when it recognised my face, and it would want a fist bump, and it was great. You talked there about the noise and the clattering around up in the office when you were downstairs. it drives my wife up the wall because she mainly works
Oh
nights,
no. Okay.
and he's driving around the desk and he's throwing his brick round and he's falling off the desk and and getting himself stuck, and it annoys her. But I think he's great, and I also plan to have a play around with the SDK as well when I find time.
Yeah, it's incredibly function. The amount of functionality it offers, it's really incredible for what was really cheap in comparison to what some of the other social robots that are out there.
Yeah, yeah, and unfortunately, there is a downside where Anki or Onki, as you said, um, that company has actually gone pop or gone bang or gone into administration or liquidation, whatever word you want to use, depending on where you are in the world. Um, so I think for the near term, Vector is still functional. It still works. There are still people working on it, but the future at the moment, I don't believe is certain though.
No, from what I understand of what's kicking around on some of the forums, the servers are still up and they'll still be up till I think August 2021. But you can't be absolutely certain. I think though when the servers go down, all it'll will probably lose is like the Alexa integration and maybe some of the hey Vector, I can ask it a question and it has to go off to the server. I think the local connectivity should still work,
Right,
but don't
right,
quote me
okay,
on that.
yeah, 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 because I think it works very similar to the Amazon devices. I won't say her name because she'll pop into live here. I've not turned her off. Being the unprofessional podcaster that I am, and yeah, so like those Amazon devices, I think it does a lot of the voice processing on the server. I guess not on the device. But I've not played with the SDK, so I don't know if you can actually speak to that.
Um, they unfortunately didn't get to open the audio streams in the SDK, but it has the back of it lights up kind of when it's ever connecting to an external server.
Yeah. Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. So I've read a few places where people are trying to sort of jailbreak the Vector, if you like, where you could set up a local server. But Vector does have a younger brother or younger sister, sibling. We'll go with
Yeah,
sibling,
sibling,
shall
yeah,
we?
Cosmo.
Um, Cosmo, yeah, which I believe runs from your phone, but isn't as powerful.
Yeah, I'm not 100. I'm not that familiar with Cosmo, but yeah, I think it ran off of you install. You had the main controlling software or whatever ran off of a phone, and then maybe over Bluetooth, you connect and control it. I think there's some programmability too, but not to the same extent as Vector.
Yeah. So hopefully some good will come from it because, as we've said, it's a great little robot and it's a really good project, and especially for the price, it was pretty
Yeah.
unbeatable. Um, and I think that the company failed to secure funding for its next round of investment, and it disappeared unfortunately because of that.
Yeah, that's what
But
I'd heard, and it was really surprising because I think they've shipped between all their like little home robots. I think it's 1.8 million units. You know, that
right.
to me, anyways, seems pretty successful. And yeah, I think you're right that just their funding didn't work out.
Yeah, yeah, and all those units. I think from some of the stuff I've seen on social media, I think most people don't own one; they own
No,
more.
right.
I think the most I've seen one person with is about 6 or 7 of
Oh,
them. That's a lot of money spent on them.
yeah, that really is. Yeah, and I suppose as well, I did wonder from looking at some of the other reviews of it that they maybe didn't sell it as well to people. That they kind of sold it. It looks very autonomous in the videos, but I think people got them. They didn't. It didn't do as much as they sort of expected. So I often wonder
Yeah,
whether they that kind of expectation management maybe just didn't work out for them.
yeah, because I would say that it was more of a techie toy. So for people like ourselves that have some ability to write software and understand it and understand the intricacies behind it, maybe it was pretty lacking for the general consumer. My kids love it. I've got twin boys that I struggle to tell the difference between them. Vector doesn't. Vector gets it bang on every
Wow,
time, and they find that amazing when they come into the office and it greets them.
that's incredible.
Yeah, yeah. So it's obviously seeing things in the face that we don't
Yeah.
see. But some of the other projects that are around, and we talked about the affordability of Vector. Now, I've always wanted a Sony Aibo, which is the AI dog, but I think that was about 2.5, 3 grand back when that first came out. I don't know if it's still a thing, but have you had a chance to look at that, play with it, anything like that?
No, I haven't had a chance to play with them, but I'm very interested in how they do this time around, because they were quite popular even for the price they were the last time they came out. And at the moment, I think they're available in Japan and America only at the moment. And the design of them this time is that it's almost like they ship a kind of a blank slate. So when you get your Aibo, it it probably has basic functionality, but then it learns and develops the more you interact with it. So it has a kind of a cloud. It is not a kind of. It has a cloud connection, and it runs an AI engine off in their cloud. So it's kind of learning all the time from you, and the more you interact with it, supposedly the more it develops. And
Right.
it
Okay.
seems pretty fully functional. I don't know if it has an SDK, a publicly available one, anyways. It's got like kind of touch sensors, and the paws have pressure sensors and things like that. It barks and it yelps and it kind of responds to commands. The kind of sort of sly thing, I guess, with it is that it comes with a cloud subscription, but that runs out after 3 years, so you have to start paying for it. And if
Oh,
you
right.
don't
Okay.
have the cloud subscription, your robot sort of just it's stunted. It doesn't develop anymore. So kind of like how old people feel about that when their kids get attached to a dog after a few years and go, oh no, he doesn't do the same things anymore because we're not going to pay for the cloud subscription.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know which cloud it uses?
Uh,
Is it a proprietary one?
I'm not sure. It's Sony, so yeah, I don't actually know.
I was wondering if we could somehow, if it was Azure, wangle it round and get it under an MSDN subscription. Yeah, it is really good, and I said it's expensive at 2.5, 3 grand, but when you look at some of these other breeds of dog that are out there, some of these thoroughbreds, and they're around that sort of price. And the great thing about the Ibos, you don't have to clean up after it, and you don't have to take it for a walk in the rain.
Yeah, that's true. My brother's dog sheds her hairs all over the place. Um, yeah,
Oh
so
yeah,
that's another thing you don't have to worry about, all right?
yeah. Although I wonder if it gets depressed if you leave it at home when you go on holiday. I don't know.
That's a good point. I mean, nobody would be interacting with it while you're away. So how are they going to model emotion and things like that? So that's a possibility.
Yeah, yeah. You come back to the house burnt down because it decided it was going to use its laser vision because it was angry. Um, but yeah, so we talked about Vector and how cool that was as a project. I think there's another robot out on the market by Misty Robotics, which from the quick look that I've had, looks like Vector on a bigger scale.
Yeah, that's probably right. And I think unlike Vector, they are marketing it more towards developers. Like it has a JavaScript based API, and I think they're going to open it up for C# and Python later. And they seem
Okay,
to be aiming it much more at developers and people who aren't necessarily roboticists or robotics engineers, and that they're
sure.
giving people the ability to develop skills. And it is quite a larger version of Vector. It is, if I remember rightly, it has the same sort of facial recognition. It possibly has better navigation than Vector, and then similar touch sensors, text to speech, and the same sort of facial animations. It doesn't have the sort of cutesy kind of Pixar animation that Vector has, but it looks very useful. It's quite a bit more as well. I think it's probably like 2 grand, 2200
Sure.
euro maybe.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, you talked there about the animations, and I showed it to my brother. I showed Vector to my brother, should I say? And he's a graphic designer, and he pointed out straight away that a lot of the um, appeal for Vector and what it does is how cute and cuddly he looks with the animations of the
Yeah,
eyes on the that it's amazing that that gives so much to it, and I guess that relates back to how much as humans we put into those facial expressions again.
yeah. Like things with eyes and things with faces, especially, we respond very strongly to. And Vector is very
Yeah,
good at kind of generating that sort of emotional feeling.
yeah, yeah. So I've seen a lot of stuff online about the robotic side of it, and it all seems very gimmicky. It doesn't seem to be all that helpful at the moment. Now, I came across my first bit of AI for good, I guess, this year. I was in Amsterdam for the Pocona Live conference, which we'll have just through the power of time shifting again in the world of podcasting, we'll have just finished the little mini series that I did at the event, and in Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, there was a robot wandering around, and this robot was there to help passengers, I think, find their flights. I looked at it from afar. I didn't actually get to go up and use it, but that was my first sort of experience of AI for good.
Yeah, that's actually, I think that's probably where the market is for kind of the social robots at the moment. It's more in larger organizations and less than sort of being in people's homes. Excuse me. That having them out in public in hotels or restaurants or not, and airports, like you said, office buildings, things like that, where people can interact with them a bit more, and people get a bit more familiar with them, and they develop through all those interactions with people, and the speech recognition gets a bit better, and maybe facial recognition, things like that. That scaled down versions, then when people are more comfortable with them, they may have a possibility of being more successful in people's homes.
Yeah, yeah, it's an area of software that I've not really done anything in. I've not really been overly involved with it in any sort of which way. Um, most of my work is line of business work now. I know there's a guy, and I'm going to butcher his name, and I'm sorry, but Clifford Aegis. I met him at NDC in London this year, and he was using .NET to build prosthetic arms, and that was an amazing project. I don't believe he's got an AI in it, but I could be wrong. Um, we're talking about AI for good, and we're talking about helping people maybe find where their flights were, or help them book a table or something like that. But you've been on the other end of AI helping you with medical sort of problems, if you will. How do you feel that AI could improve people's quality of lives? What sort of areas do you see going forward?
So how AI could improve the quality of life, for starters, anyways, in healthcare, I think it could really help the day to day, the working day to day for doctors and nurses. You know, these are people who obviously there's parts of their person or an element of their personality that wants them to help people, and with the I see in Irish hospitals, especially just the workload and the strain and hassle that they're under. And so there's a one really interesting robotics project I've seen from Texas is by a company called Diligent Robotics, and they have a robot called Moxie. And what Moxie is designed to do is take over some of the extra work that some of the nurses would do or other hospital staff would do. And they've hooked Moxie up to the IT system in the hospital, and it's tied to actions that are triggered from the system. And so when someone checks out of a hospital, there's work that has to be done in their room to make it ready for the next patient. And previously, nurses and staff would have to go off and collect the cleaning supplies, bring them to the room, take the bed linen, take it to laundry, remake the bed and everything. So Moxie is designed to actually go on a checkout event, go to a storage room, collect the cleaning supplies, drop them off at the room. So when the nurses show up, the cleaning supplies are there. It will then take the laundry, take the dirty clothes, bring it to the laundry, and it saves a lot of time that the extra tasks that nurses would be expected to do. And I think,
Yeah. That's the sort of robot that you want around the house as well.
yeah, and stuff like that would be useful where you could have a robot. Say, I remember this clearly when I was in hospital, that you'd have a phlebotomist would come around to take blood samples, and then they would have to bring those blood
Yeah.
samples back. But if you had a social robot there to help, that you could give them the blood sample, sorry, and they could return it to a lab, and it maintains a chain of custody, so nobody can get into that sample unless they say it's a PIN number or a swipe card.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and a couple of other interesting, I think they're interesting anyway, social robot products is there's a Casper, which is an autism research project by the University of Hertfordshire. And it's designed to help children on the autism spectrum to how to learn how to read social cues and to sort of learn how to interact with people. And the reason they found success with robots and interacting with children with autism is people are kind of, for want of a better word, are quite noisy. You know, we fidget. We don't always say maintain eye contact and things like that. And it's hard to say understand some of the things people would say. We gesture and maybe use metaphor and stuff. And so for children with autism, there are things that can be quite difficult to understand. And so Kirsten Doughtenhan, I think, is the lead researcher's name. She's been leading work to kind of build these robots that would take children through normal sort of interactions and like how to maintain eye contact and things like that. And they found that the children who have gone through these little classes are actually more socially interactive with their parents and with their teachers and their caregivers when they're outside of these private sessions. So that's something I think is really, really good.
Yeah. There's a lot that I can relate to there. My wife is a nurse, so I could see from some of the stuff that she's complained about that are things that she shouldn't really have to do. They're part of the job, but they can be picked up by a robot. Some of these more menial tasks. If they're you got patients sitting around waiting for porters to come and take them from one ward to another or something like that, you got these robots that could do those tasks as well, which is I think there's a definite market for it.
Yeah, and
Uh,
there's a Trinity College here in Ireland, in Dublin. They've released a social robot called Stevie, and it's designed to be a nursing home assistant. And on top of the kind of what you'd expect from a social robot, they've also connected it to the thermostat and lighting and stuff in the nursing home. So rather than necessarily an assistant in the home having to turn off lights or turn on lights or adjust the thermostat, a residents, I believe, can interact with the robot and have the robot do that for them if they're not mobile enough to do it themselves.
yeah, yeah. I was at Hack 24 the last time that it ran, and one of the tasks there was to build something with AI for good or machine learning for good. And I had an idea which it wasn't very good for a hackathon because there wasn't much to show, and we didn't end up building it in the end. But it was a mirror, so you could put this mirror in a the house of a loved one that's maybe got some difficulties in life. Maybe they're just getting on a little bit, and they just need a little bit of help because the older generation, we can often sort of get that wrapped up in our own lives that we forget that we haven't visited them, and that can be quite distressing for them. Now, what this mirror did is it used machine learning to take the person's photograph whenever you looked into the mirror, and it would score the photograph to try and work out what that person's mind state was like, what that mood was like. And the idea behind it was that if you looked at it and that you were looking a little bit depressed or a little bit unhappy, that it would mark that down. And if you looked again in an hour or 2 hours and you were still looking a little bit unhappy, it could maybe contact loved ones and say, look, we think you should get in touch with them, or if they were looking sort of out of sorts, because some of the illnesses and that have highs and lows. If they're in a state of mania, could we pick that up with machine learning, see that sort of expression and movement in the person, and again contact somebody, or so either a loved one or an emergency services or something like that, just to give you that little bit of extra help, and to support that loved one. I thought it would have been nice to have, but as I said, it wasn't a very good project for a hackathon, because there wasn't much to see, and it's all about the visibility of a project.
Yeah, well, that's a very good idea. I mean, part of what social robots are supposed to do is to kind of maintain a model of the people that they interact with, so they can learn to adjust their response to an interaction with someone. So they're trying to maintain their own model, kind of, or ideally they would maintain their own model of themselves, but also how they relate to other people. So that would be a very good example of monitoring someone, their facial expression, or their appearance, or their body language, and say their pattern of their movement around the house, or things like that.
Yeah.
That's I think that would be a very good use.
Yeah, I had a few issues with it when I was tinkering around with the proof of concept before we built it for the hackathon. So our idea was the team of 4 of us would go off and do our own little project, and then we would present it to each other and decide which one we were going to move forward and which ones we were going to present. And I had issues with the Microsoft machine learning service, where you would pass it a photograph, and no matter which expression I pulled, it told me that I was angry. It got my age wrong by about 20 years, so that sort of killed it for me. It just thought I was an angry old man, and no matter what I did, I over exaggerated like happiness and fright and all that sort of stuff, and it just didn't give me anything back. But that was quite a while ago, and I've seen a few things since, but maybe it's improved. Or maybe it just couldn't read my my ugly face. I don't know which one it was. It might be a project that I come back to, though. When I find time, I'm so busy with so many things. I say it every time I do an episode with somebody about something, like I've got a real interest in this. I really want to learn some more about it, and never do. Have you got any plans for more projects with AI, maybe with Vector and or something else?
Yeah, I've actually kind of put in, since I was in touch with you about the medication reminder, I've built a lot more functionality into it based on my own experiences of going to hospitals a lot and seeing doctors. I've kind of added in that's an appointment reminder functionality, so it reminds me a couple of days in advance of my appointments. It sends me an email with the details of my last appointment, and it gives me a chance to have a think about, is there anything I want to talk to the doctor about? Because in the past, like going to appointments, often, well, when my Crohn's disease was active, you're kind of exhausted all the time, and then you're usually going from work.
Yeah.
And there's stuff from work that's still on your mind, because nobody ever is able to kind of leave on a successful commit, or you've never solved the problem. There's always something nagging away at the back of your mind. So so I added the functionality in to remind me of appointments, and it's an email that I can review on my way to the hospital when I'm in the waiting room. I added in kind of a medical quiz then. And I wanted to experiment with the other kind of forms of input. So those custom object markers, if you've seen them, they're like kind of giant QR code kind of things. And I built a medical quiz based off my own medical history, because I have that information. Everyone should have their own medical history. It's crazy that we don't have access to that information. It's not all in the one place. And so it just generates random questions based on, say, how much of my medicine I have left, when I'm supposed to take my medication, what's the name, what's the rather than the trade name of my medicine, what's the actual medical term for it? Because I've been in situations where doctors would use the names interchangeably, and it's kind of confusing. Some people say Humira, other people say adalimumab, and you're kind of like, wait, what's the thing I'm injecting myself with? And it was all sort of
Yeah,
all kind of things I wish I had when I was first diagnosed, when it was really struggling. Like I'm fine now, thankfully. I've been in remission for 7 years, and all the kind of
it's good to hear.
thanks the bad stuff with Crohn's was very much at the start. I had surgery, and that's where I was trialing all the different types of medicine, see what worked. So that's what informed a lot of the design with my project. And most recently, the last functionality I put in was I finally made some use of the facial recognition software. That it's a kind of a post-appointment little nudge, say, "Hey, well done for going to your appointment." I have it set up so he turns in place to try and find me, so I know when my appointment is. And so it creates a task for him. And yeah, see, I'm even using anthropomorphic terms, him.
Yeah.
Um, uh,
Have you asked him? Does he identify as him?
no, I haven't really gotten that far with it. Yeah, so it's set up to run because I know when my appointment is, and it creates a task, and that the cron job that's running to control Vector. It checks. He runs off, drives off his charger, checks around, see if I'm there, if I'm back from the appointment. If I'm not, he goes back on the charger, and he keeps doing that until about 8 o'clock. I think I would set up for. So when I would be home, and then when he recognizes me, then there's the whole thing of, "Hey, welcome home. Well done you for going to your appointment. Don't forget to add your update your prescription, add your next appointment into your calendar." Just like things like that that I couldn't. I would really have loved to have had when I
Yeah.
was my disease was still active. And now that's done. The next part of what I'm trying to do is trying to get up to speed with computer vision. So I've started working on a medication recognition kind of project using Vector, because you have access to the video stream. So I expect that's going to take me a while to work on, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Saying that you've been to an appointment, I don't know. Maybe you could plug it into the Google API if you had an Android phone, and it could, because we all know that the Android phone tracks you wherever you go. Get into that, and Vector could say, if you've been to the appointment, you go, "Oh yes, I've been," and it looks at that data and says, "You didn't go, did you?"
Well, that's actually that's a very good point, and something I realized myself when I was chipping away in the background of trying to find other things to do was uh, the electronic health records that a lot of hospitals use. That
Yeah.
there's HL7, Health Level 7, and FHIR, which is I can't remember what FHIR stands for. That basically they generate records all the time, and so there's actually I think it's called an encounter when you go to a hospital. So if I was able to connect up this system at home to a hospital or a private practice, that had generated the
Right.
encounter event, and if I didn't show up, that would be a no-show, or if I did show up, it would be arrived. So kind of just to try and integrate it all in a way that would sort of make sense.
Yeah, yeah. Now I built a skill for my Amazon device quite a while ago. I did never release it because it wanted a million of these different documents for terms of service and privacy policies and all that sort of stuff, which I never got around to doing because my skill was called Silicon Heaven, so it was based on the Red Dwarf series, and basically the device acted like Holly, and you could act out a couple of the scenes from the first series. I think that would be quite good to have Vector do that, because in the later series where Holly was wheeling himself around as a TV on a trolley, that'd be really good because you could come in and Vector could welcome you with, "All right, dudes," and stuff like that. For it, I think that'd be quite good, and to get it to act out some of the scenes with you, like, "Do you want to play a game? Pick a game, any game, chess." "Oh, what drafts? No, chess. Monopoly? No, chess." Um, I think that would be quite good, and maybe I could release something on that platform. So there's definitely a project in it for me, I think, when I find the time. So it is interesting. Now, before we started recording, we also talked about something, some research project. I think it was called Predict. And if you want to talk about that.
Oh yeah, so Yeah, the PREDICT study is, I think, to my knowledge, it's probably the largest study into inflammatory bowel disease. It's been run in the NHS, and they're looking, if anyone, anyone who has inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, things like that, they're looking for people to enroll in the program. All the details are on their website, which is predict with two C's and then .co.uk. And what they're trying to do is gather as much information as they can to figure out how people uh, develop flare-ups. So it's when the disease becomes active again, and also what helps people get into and stay in remission. So that's where the disease is not active, and generally people can get a bit more of their lives back. And if you want to talk about it in AI terms, they're collecting a lot of what would be labeled data. So they're collecting diet information, environmental factors, exercise, kind of just general lifestyle data, and I'd be very, very interested to see what comes out of it. I'm sure there's a lot of machine learning graduates or PhDs who really want to get their hands on that data too, because the the stats on Crohn's disease, especially, is it's becoming more prevalent. It's, I think, in Edinburgh, I think 1 in 125 people have some form of inflammatory bowel disease,
Right.
and Canada has quite a problem with it. Now, I've never actually checked to see if my genetic makeup, I've got ancestors from Scotland and Canada. I don't know. um,
Maybe.
yeah,
Maybe.
so that's what the predict study is, and yeah, I'd really encourage anyone who is interested in it to check it out and see if they either just keep an eye on it for their own interest or if they can contribute to it.
Yeah. Well, I know two people that have Crohn's disease. It's one of those diseases that doesn't really go away, but you learn to live with it when it's in remission. Um, so I will definitely be passing on the details to them to find out if they know about it to start with, and if not, maybe to get involved. I know quite a lot of people that have some form of IBS as well, which can be triggered through stress and maybe foods and diet and exercise and all that sort of stuff. But it is very an interesting subject. So for any listeners out there, if you are interested, if you do suffer and you are, I guess, in the UK, to get involved. I don't know, is the Predict project further sort of wider scale than just the UK?
To my knowledge, because it's run by the NHS, I think it's just in England. Sorry, just in the
Sure,
United Kingdom. So I think it's Wales, England, Scotland, and possibly Northern Ireland.
sure, sure. Okay, so I will include links to that in the
That'd be
show
great.
notes. So make sure everybody out there, you go and you check the show notes out. If our listeners wanted to learn a little bit more about AI for good, maybe get involved, start their own project, is there any resources that you would recommend that they go and get a hold of and consume?
Um, a really good book I'd recommend is by Dr. Eric Topol. Sorry, it's called Deep Medicine, and it's a very realistic breakdown, kind of what he thinks would be useful to use artificial intelligence for in the medical world, and what companies are claiming they can do. And he's very good at sort of popping a lot of the hype bubbles, which is how kind of unfortunately have developed as the popularity of AI and deep learning in particular has increased over and over. And there's a lot of because people want views and eyeballs on their websites, they kind of write sort of inflammatory articles or add a lot of hype into what they report artificial intelligence can do. Um, so he wants to put kind of the people back into healthcare, in that when you go and see a doctor, they're not stuck behind a desk all the time. They're actually there to interact with you, and he actually sort of pushes for he wants more speech recognition, so that doctors aren't I've seen this myself when I go see doctors. They're sort of talking to you and then they're typing because they're trying to track all the notes of what you say. So he's a big he's a big champion of trying to use speech recognition a lot more. But he does cover everything from computer vision and say trying to use it to improve colonoscopy scans for cancerous lesions, X-rays and CT scans, right the way through to personalized medicine and diet. So that's a book I would definitely recommend if anyone is interested. Should read that.
Awesome. So I think we're out of time now for today. But thank you again for coming on and sharing some of your story and some of your passion with us today.
No problem at all. I was absolutely delighted when you asked if I wanted to talk about it all, and it was a great help for me to be able to kind of condense everything and try and say what do I actually want to sort of say, and hopefully I've done an okay job of doing of it.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. It's been good. It's been interesting. You've opened up my mind to a few things I wasn't aware of, which is always good. And getting interaction with the listeners is always difficult. So whenever anybody does reach out and leaves a comment on the website, or they drop me a message on Twitter, I always try and get back in touch with them and do the best I can to sort of like thank them for being involved. So to sort of take that full circle and have you on the show after being a listener, it's great, and to know that what I am doing, it's not just me shouting out into the ether. People are getting something of benefit from the time and the energy that I put out there. So that's great. So thank you for your kind words as well.
No problem at all. You're very welcome.
And thank you to everybody out there for listening to The Cynical Developer. I'm James Stoddart, and you've been listening to Anthony Cosgrove talking about AI for good. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website, where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help The Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.